What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Moive Emporium's flashback review of the film 28 Weeks Later. This is directed by Juan Fresnadillo. Okay, so here we have come to the second film in the 28 film franchise. Of course, this is not directed by Danny Boyle or even written by Alex Garland. This is a completely new director, a completely new set of writers, but still isn't the same universe as the original 28 Days Later, but sees the film kind of following forward 28 weeks later. So with the success of 28 Days Later, there had been rumblings of doing a brand new film. Alex Garland and of course Danny Boyle were working on a new film. It's, 4 years later, so on and so forth, and things didn't work out too well. He ended up going to do Sunshine, which Danny Boyle worked on and Alex Garland worked on, as well as Cillian Murphy. So nobody really came back for this movie. So of course, with the success that was 28 Days Later, how do you do that? How do you make a brand new film in this universe that was considered a revolutionary take on the Rage Infected franchise? Well, you hire a Spanish filmmaker, Juan Fresnadillo. You bring in a bunch of new writers, and then you hire people like Robert Carlyle, Jeremy Renner, Rose Byrne, Imogen Poots, Idris Elba, Harry Perrineau, and you basically make it a much more bigger budgeted film, but still holding the kind of same spirit as what the first film did. And so with that said, this movie, which actually starts out in the kind of same time frame as 28 Days Later, eventually shoots off into 28 Weeks Later into London's territory of the Isle of Dogs, and we see a world where pretty much the infected have kind of dissipated. So what happens is, if you've seen this film, you know that this movie has like an incredible opening, like one of the best openings of like film in like the history. It's a movie where like we have about 6 individuals who are trying to survive in this like cottage in the middle of the London, or the England countryside, and of course a kid pops up and all hell breaks loose, and basically the infected kind of crash the party, and everybody is killed for the most part, except for the wife and the husband, which is of course played by Robert Carlyle and so on and so forth. And because of what ends up happening, they find themselves up in the kind of the attic room or whatever. And Robert Carlyle is like, leave the kid, we gotta go. And the woman's like, we're not leaving the kid. And Robert Carlyle does the scummy thing of leaving his wife to basically die in the hands of the infected. He runs off, and we shoot 28 weeks later, where he's now a informant or some kind of custodial worker or whatever in this high rise in a portion of the Isle of Dogs. But once again, if you remember that scene, it is a very potent scene. John Murphy's score ramps up, the score that we heard in, of course, 28 Days Later. It just builds and builds and builds. The tension builds. It starts out kind of calm. They're in a house, they're protecting themselves. And then as the rage-induced infected kind of crash the party, it builds and builds and builds to this crescendo that is just heartbreaking and sad and disturbing, and shows the cowardice side of humanity, and really just kind of shows what would happen for most people in an apocalyptic scenario like a zombie apocalypse. And I thought Robert Carlyle does an amazing job, as he always does, as creating the really scummy individual. He's very good at like playing his characters. Like if you ever seen Trainspotting, he's just very good at what he does. And so when we eventually go into the main story, because this is kind of a prologue, it's a very interesting one, because once again, they have kind of quarantined off, similar to something like, Escape from New York, not in that kind of aspect, but you know what I mean. And they found a way for the infected to die off by just not being able to feed off people. And I really was really loving this movie. I remember seeing this movie in the theater, and I wasn't like a huge fan of it, similar to like 28 Days Later, believe it or not. But I remember the kind of aspects of this movie really being a very interesting action thriller, a much more bombastic movie, but a movie that sets up pieces about how being contained will never keep you safe. And that's what I feel like 28 years later is going to do, where they're stuck on this island, or they're safe on this island, and things just kind of go out of chaos. But the unfortunate nature of what this movie does is it adds 2 kids who are basically lied to by their father about what exactly happened. The two kids are Andy and of course Tammy. Tammy, of course, is played by Imogen Poots, and they're lied to by their father, who is of course played by Robert Carlyle. He says the mother is killed, so they're told not to leave the Isle of Dogs, the quarantine safe zone. And what do? They leave it anyways. We have the military on the roofs. We of course have Harry Perrineau, and we of course have Jeremy Renner as the two kind of main military forces. Idris Elba is of course in charge of the military forces. And what do these kids do? They sneak past the military, they go back to their home, and they find their mother. Now, all this stuff is really good. It's really well put together. It's authentic. It feels interesting. It feels kind of chaotic. It feels calming. Once again, Rose Byrne is a scientist, so we're seeing kind of all aspects of what this kind of nature of quarantine is. But when you have the kids escape, that is going to be a problem. So therefore, they find their mother, who is delusional, who is asymptomatic of the virus. She's not able to turn into an infected rage virus person. And it leads to Robert Carlyle realizing that his wife's alive. He kisses her and he turns into a rage zombie infected person, causes all the chaos, and the place explodes and everything goes into chaos and people are killed. The army or the military has to shoot down and kill people. Jeremy Renner has a crisis of conscience. He of course has Harry Perrineau, who can fly helicopters, and it basically turns into like this escape movie where the infected, led by Don, who is the Robert Carlyle character, chasing after and just destroying the Isle of Dogs and destroying everything. Idris Elba is killed in this ensuing segment. A bunch of people are killed because they're shot to death or they're being killed by the infected. Basically, is Jeremy Renner's sergeant character, Rose Byrne's scientist character, the two kids, and the escape to Wembley Stadium, where at first they're going to meet him in this field and this park, and it goes very bad. All the infected come. Of course, Harry Perrineau's character uses his helicopter is a really cool, effective, murder weapon. But then it leads to, of course, Jeremy Renner's character being killed and actually destroyed by them catching him on fire, using the flamethrowers. Rose Byrne's character is eventually killed, and she is killed by Don's character. And of course, we find out Andy's character is asymptomatic, and they eventually escape to France, where we learn later on that, of course, the zombie infection, rage virus, or whatever has come to, of course, France, which leads into some theories that the kid that is Andy, who's asymptomatic, who carries the virus, may have infected someone and it caused all kinds of chaos. I mean, that's the theory. That's kind of where I kind of lean on that. But I just want to kind of get through the synopsis because it is a very uneven movie, to be fairly honest. It's a movie that really is hampered down by kind of the action set pieces, the fast-paced nature to it. It feels like it's very convoluted as it moves along. It just, like, how Don is able to because Don is killed by Tammy in the movie as she shoots him, and because he's now infected. And I don't know. I love the stuff that opens up this movie. Of course, the intro prologue sequence. I love the stuff up until Don becomes infected because I think it's interesting. I think it's unique. I think the fact they find their mother, who is asymptomatic of the virus, who lives, who's just delusional because she's been by herself for so long, which is another kind of interesting concept of so she escaped the cottage. She has a bite mark on her hand. They take her blood, stuff like that. How did she get to the house with none of the military noticing, with none of the military saying anything? It's a real kind of, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a plot hole, but it's a very interesting one to think about because you're wondering how exactly that happens. But you gotta kind of go with it, to be fairly honest, because you have to have Robert Carlyle's character get infected. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but you kind of question and wonder that. And I do appreciate and I do love the simple fact that the infected can easily infect another human being or another thing just by the nature of kissing. It definitely deals with STDs and what kind of what it's referencing, and kind of nature of how viruses spread. Look at the COVID virus is really kind of, if you think about it, it's really kind of how easily it spreads. There's some fun stuff, but it just feels like it's rushing at that point. It's only an hour and 39 minutes anyways, but it feels like it's rushing quickly to the point where it's missing some kind of authenticity. It just feels like they're trying to get to set piece really quickly. And I don't necessarily love that stuff, and I don't necessarily think it's terrible, but when you lose Jeremy Renner and Rose Byrne within a 5-minute stretch and you're not really adding a whole lot there, yes, the shootout sequences and yes, the flamethrower stuff is interesting and it's very disturbing, but it's it's one of those things where I feel like they could add more to it. They could add another 10-15 minutes to this movie, kind of like stretch it out, even it out a little bit, kind of, because it feels so even out in the beginning, which is the first like 30 or 40 minutes of the movie, and then it leads into like the last hour of this movie where it just feels like it's so chaotic and so messy. And once again, it doesn't feel like a whole complete movie. Like they cut a lot out to kind of get to a certain length, and they're just, as much as I like what Juan Fresnadillo is doing in this movie, I think Danny Boyle has a much more interesting kind of texture to his movie and what he was doing. I thought the characters were much more interesting. I think they're a little less dimensional in this movie, and I think it's a movie that is just a better half than it is a whole. And once again, it doesn't take away from, it's still an effective movie when it comes to how it's shot, how crazy, how scary, how disturbing the infected are, how we watch, Robert Carlyle does a really nice job in this movie when he becomes infected, and you watch him like bleed all over someone and rip tear the eyes out of his wife and tear her neck out and stuff like that. It's really effective stuff. And I think when it boils down to it, it's still a entertaining movie. It's not as good as 28 Days Later, but it's still a movie that is a good horror film that really has an interesting kind of chaotic moments to it, chaotic speed to it. And I think the characters do just enough to levitate the film to be much more than what could be, a sequelitis type of situation. At least it's different. At least it goes to different places. I think this is kind of the next step, the next evolution into what could happen in a zombie apocalypse or a rage infected virus or whatever it is. And so therefore I still recommend this movie. I still think it's a fun, entertaining movie with a lot of interesting ideas and concepts about what would you do if the scenario kind of started like easing itself out and we becoming like more normal, kind of rebuilding, constructing and stuff like that. How would you affect that? The fact that they take the Isle of Dogs and they kind of put a chain link of fence around it just to keep people in the safe zone and stuff like that. And what would happen if, as things do, as if you ever watch Star Wars, there's always going to be the bad group of people who just kind of ruin everything. That's what this movie is trying to do. So overall, to kind of conclude this review, this flashback review, it's a good movie. It really is. It's an entertaining movie with a lot of interesting, fun stuff. It's not as good as 28 Days Later. It's not as potent as 28 Days Later. But I think in the end, it's worthy of just a watch. I mean, if you're sitting at home waiting for 28 years later, you obviously have seen this movie. But if you haven't, it's a good movie. It's entertaining. Once again, it did half of what the original movie did, but it's still, it was successful. And here we are leading up to what is this now, 8-9 years later or 19 years later, whatever it's been, and we're finally getting 28 years later, which once again reunites Danny Boyle with Alice Garland. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, that's my take on 28 Weeks Later. So with that said, it is on Disney Plus, so check it out if you get a chance. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching my review of 28 Weeks Later. I do appreciate it. Comments below on what you think of 28 Weeks Later. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What's your favorite parts? All that good stuff. But if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.